Françoise?
Françoise, everybody ready? Good afternoon to all of you. Thanks a lot for being here. It's a cool afternoon, as you can see. But I think about the Prime Minister of Greenland. He left his country. The temperature was 5 degrees. And now he's melting. We would like to thank him for this effort. As you can see, we have a wonderful panel of experts. We are delighted to welcome all these prominent personalities. First of all, I will hand over to Françoise Benamou. The title of this panel discussion, A World, Different Visions, Who Sets the Standards? Thank you, Anne-Sophie. Good afternoon to all of you, ladies and gentlemen, and take heart. It's very hot. We have a wonderful panel of experts. I will be fast. After the Cold War, we thought that globalization will make it possible to forget about the regional conflicts and ideological conflicts. But these conflicts have emerged again, and there's a war of values, a war of narratives, and the objective is to impose upon the minds of people history that they haven't contributed to forge. It is not their history, and they cannot relate to that type of history. So controlling the narratives has turned out to be a major objective of the diplomacies. It's also a matter of preserving the market shares. This is what Mr. Fouché wrote. We are in a world without landmarks, but with different types of visions. Who imposes his vision? It's very difficult to come up with a simple answer for the digital companies, and their power is equivalent to that of the states. They want to impose their visions, and the technological proceeds are national proceeds. That's why the United States are battling against the European vision, respect for people, fake news and manipulation, innovation. It is not the wild, wild west. Regarding the powerful states, they are eager to control regions. They want to grab rare resources. They want to control the critical minerals and strategic commodities. They want to close down waterways. The Wall Street Journal said, and I quote, "The freedom of the seas, was it an historic anomaly regarding the North American will to grab Greenland and its resources?" This goes through a narrative that is characterized by many false information. So Europe is torn apart. The hostility of the United States imposing their visions and their coercive measures. On the other hand, China and the Prime Minister of China told us that the worries of the Europeans regarding the advent of these technological products, electric cars, solar panels, and all the rest of it. He said, and I quote, that it is a part of an unfriendly narrative, and that it was important to recognize the purchase of Chinese goods by Europe. And there's a trade imbalance between China and Europe to the tune of 325 million euros, and then a narrative whereby China will have some imperialist drives. So Europe has no choice but to unite with different viewpoints. It's important to assert the sovereignty to secure the supply chains, access to resources. Europe has to defend a market despite the fact that some states have criticized Europe's model. Europe has to express its values, its role, and its vision. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Françoise. So, a world, different visions. I mean, who sets the standard? It's a broad discussion, but who imposes its stance, and who has to defend itself? Who has to adapt? And we have the Prime Minister of Greenland, Jens Frederik Nielsen, and I can tell you that he was in the front line because of Donald Trump. So, Prime Minister, do you think that the conquest, annexation projects, do you think that they are still topical? And what about this situation? How has it changed your vision of the world and the relations between the state?
Thank you. Ooh, it's hot in France. Sorry for that. But look, the world order is also hot at the moment. We, of course, in Greenland, we have been under severe pressure for now a couple of 2 years, unacceptable pressure, because we have the geological location that we have now. We don't see the finish line yet. We have taken steps in the right direction through direct dialogue between us and the United States. We have had a defense agreement for 80 years now. We have been respectful to each other and partners, but the world we want to come back to that. We want to be respectful to each other, and we want to cooperate and secure the security in our region. No problem. But the world and the way we see the world on now is changing. In Greenland, we are looking at it like this. We want to work together and have great partnership with like-minded countries. Countries who share the values of democracy, respect for international law, human rights, and so on. That's the countries we want to work with now. And in this crisis we have been in, France, the European Union has been a great support for us because they share the values of democracy and respect. Great support. Just 3 days ago, it was said again from the special envoy of the United States to Greenland that Trump haven't lost the idea of overtaking Greenland. So no, the pressure is not off. We need to stand together, stand firmly together. The countries who share the values, Greenland will choose to stand with those countries. That's why Greenland chooses to stand with the European Union, chooses to stand with France, chooses to stand with Denmark, the Nordics, and NATO. And I think in this changing world right now, we have to do it. Also countries like Canada. We have to move closer together, and it can benefit for all of us. I will take it a bit further, because right now we are talking a lot about resilience in the European Union. It's all about the competitiveness and to be less dependent on countries. We have some resources we can utilize in Greenland where we can one-to-one actually make the European Union or countries that we work close together with less dependent on China, for example, in rare earth minerals. So we need to explore that. We need to work close together. We need to stand together. And I can say in terms of the United States, Greenland will never give up their right to self-determination. We will never give up on our values, and we will never be for sale. Thanks a lot, Mr. Barrow.
Merci.
Thank you, Prime Minister, and thank you for paying tribute to France. And France has supported Greenland, and some forces were sent to Greenland, 15 men or so. It was not a lot, but it was very symbolic. At the same time, it's important, to remind us of the fact that it's a European region. We have Mr. Barrot, the Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs. I'm not going to ask you if we would have fought against the United States, and Mr. Trump came up with a narrative that has surprised many people in Europe, but there's a war of narratives. What is your stance regarding this war of narratives? First of all, thanks a lot, for giving me the opportunity to exchange my views with prominent personalities and a full-fledged European hero last year, remember, and the huge and imperialistic pressure from the United States. Jens Frederick Nielsen stood up and he said, no, the people in Greenland chose Europe, NATO. Greenland is not up for sale. Greenland shouldn't be taken over. He showed unbelievable courage. He was the face of Europe. Congratulations to you. And And this brings us to this issue of narratives. The nations, they need narratives in order to hold water, because you have institutions, regions, you have borders, administrations, but it's much more than that. It's a matter of representation. So with narratives, people with different lives, can stand together, and the opponents, our adversaries, have understood this concept. So they develop assertive narratives, and there is a kind of battle for perceptions. There's a war for narratives. These are new empires with a revisionist stance regarding self-determination of the peoples, inviolability of the borders. And if you look at the narratives, they are criticizing, excoriating the EU being a counter-model that should be impaired or shut down. Europe is synonymous with decadence. Europe is demoted. Europe is a value of the past, and Europe is on the verge of civilizational erasure. So in Europe, basically, we've moved away from the battle of narratives. Why? Because we considered that our ideas had a universal value, and we thought that these values will be imposed as a matter of course. So people used the narrative tools, and it was a form of betrayal. What is the upshot of all that? A civilization, people, as Françoise pointed out, a civilization that gives up telling its own narrative, it's doomed to be under the narrative of others. When you don't have your own narrative, basically you are contaminated by the narratives of others, by their obsessions, standards, cultures, languages, and this is not something new. And this is something that is quite ancient. Remember what Stefan Zweig wrote about Europe 1 century ago, in 1925. And I quote, "The real danger for Europe is about the mind, the import of American boredom, abominable boredom that will destroy the streets and homes. It is not the European boredom with people playing dominoes or smoking a pipe. The American boredom is nervous, aggressive, and dazed by sports and sensations, nothing like a game, but a furious folly that will escape time with artistic media that are new, such as cinema, the radio, mass nurturing process in order to transform pleasure into corporations." So this frightening way from America is about uniformity, the same suit, the same book, the same biro, the same conversations, and the same cars instead of the trajectory. It's about a monotonous life that can threaten us. And the idea is to fragment the human being and to unify or standardize the vision of the world with a lot of monotony. So faced with this intoxication of the European soul by the others, what can we do? We have to tell our own narrative. We have to say who we are, a country, a continent, a civilization that has been forged over centuries with arts, philosophy, science, and law, rule of law, with major strides in democracy and technology, a country, a continent in which we live better than in the US or in China. We live longer in better health, and we are freer. Life expectancy is longer, infant mortality is lower, twice as less as in the US and in China. Inequalities are not as high as in China and in the United States. And if you look at Europe, a lot of coalition of countries, the market is wider and we have the most democratic society. Unlike what has been said, Europe can be a superpower in the 21st century, and it has all it takes to do that. Independent continent that can resist the thrust of empires. A democratic power that will unite the peoples who want to remain free. They don't have to choose a camp, so Europe can be a superpower in the 21st century, but it's a matter of courage, determination, and willpower. Thank you, Minister. So economic and diplomatic tensions abounded, but in February, war in the Middle East broke out, and people who were not familiar with the Strait of Hormuz are now familiar with the Strait of Hormuz. So 20% of global oil is transiting from through the Strait of Hormuz. The trade routes are increasingly fragile. So what about your group? How do you adapt to this new strategic situation? Good afternoon to all of you. Complex, complicated. And when we hear the Prime Minister of Greenland, it's even more complex, more complicated. Why do I say so? I'm in the logistics business, in the maritime transports business. We don't have to choose a camp. We are paid to convey a commodity from point A to point B. We need to comply with the rules, but the main objective is to meet the needs and requirements of customers, whether they are European, American, or Asian. We don't have to take a stance. We don't have to say we agree or we disagree. We try to do our job. And if you look at the Strait of Hormuz, since the end of February, there has been a blockade in the Strait of Hormuz. 11 ships were stranded in the Strait of Hormuz. A few years ago, never ever had we had thought that the Strait of Hormuz would close. We said that it wouldn't happen. They would find a solution. This is what we thought. But if you look at the world of today, there is a wide array of crises, 120 crises. Of course, you have a new crisis that comes up, that emerges, but there are other crises that will come to the fore, and we need to manage those crises and to provide some services to our customers. So 3 months after, so a ship has been hit by a missile. Some crew members were burnt. We couldn't fetch this ship for quite a number of weeks. The ship was escorted, but the ship was severely damaged. So maybe this ship might not be used again. So you're going to tell me that your business is very dangerous. You're right, because there are lots of problems in the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz might be subjected to a toll gate. It would be disastrous. Maritime transportation should be free, accessible, and if the Strait of Hormuz is subjected to a toll gate, why not other straits, for example, the Strait of Malaga? So this is something that we need to avert. So the first ship managed to operate, but we have 4 other vessels that are still stranded, but we don't have the key to the solution. Iran and US are ruling the roost, and one day they will allow us to operate our vessels, but we need to work in a peaceful environment. We want to convey the commodities easily. We don't want to think about the situation too much. We don't want our crew members to be hit. We want to offer a an environment whereby our people, our staff members can work safely. And we need to adapt to this situation. We need to come up with new solutions and alternatives. So we invested in the Suar port, in the Oman Sultanate. If the strait is blocked, we could unload the commodities, and the commodities will be conveyed using the roadways. So we need to come up with some credible solutions. Prices have increased. The oil price has skyrocketed. Now it is down, but insurance companies have increased their fees. It's up to us to come up with solutions so that we are not penalized. We don't want maritime transport to be impaired in the long term. We look at this crisis, or beyond this crisis. We need to invest. We know that these are long-term investments. The life cycle of a ship is 25 years of age, so we invest in the long term. We will continue to invest in the long term. We will make sure that we can provide innovative solutions to our customers. We invest a lot in AI, because when you have a long-term vision, AI, decarbonization are key sectors to tap. So the world is complicated. We need to adapt ourselves. We need to come up with some solutions. We need to be in a position to offer new solutions. We shouldn't think too much about that, because other people will make decisions on our behalf. Thank you. So we are in a dangerous world. So the defense companies are under the radar, and Safran produces some radars. Rox McInnes, you are the chairman of Safran. We can talk about defense. War is not simply a matter for the Middle East, but war is buffeting Europe, especially with the war in Ukraine. How can we defend the world at a time when the world is dominated by empires? There are different visions, free empires. Russia, so to build up the USSR, and this is a challenge for Europe, a narrative that is insidious, fueled by the social networks. The United States imperial, we are lackeys, they are hostile to the European values, and it's a kind of cunning attitude. They support the extreme parties, they are interventionists. So at the end of the day, for China, there isn't a clear narrative, but so predation is key, and they want to oppose the North and the South. These are opponents of our European values. These are enemies of the social contract, cohesion, diversity, ethnic diversity, cultural diversity, enemies of the rule of law, enemies of the economic freedom. Now you have the Popian term, i.e. the international populists. So what is our narrative? Our narrative is the best one. Let us find the vision, let us defend this narrative. Having said that, if you want to defend yourself, you have to be attractive and solid. The social model, the welfare model, has lots of virtues. It is a source of inspiration, but it is petering out. So we need to find a consensus. Otherwise, we will be disillusioned. So our political leaders will have to tell the truth, the narrative of a truth, and will prove Mr. de Gaulle wrong. What is precious to the nation means that you might incur some losses in the elections, and we need to prove him wrong. So we decided to talk about Mr. Bloch, and I will end up with a quote of Marc Bloch. So whatever the complacency and lies, I think that it is similar to leprosis. So we have to be careful with this disease, leprosis. So after Zweig, Mr. Mark Bloch, how can Europe resist against the empires? This is a question that will put to the Minister of Finance, Kyriakos Periarakis. Europe should be a great economic power.
Europe is feeling the heat, and I would say in the same manner that we're feeling the heat in this room, primarily the Prime Minister and myself, and even though he's from Greenland and I'm from Greece, and I shouldn't be feeling the heat the same way. But we are feeling the heat, and the change in the contextual environment affects the way you perceive the world. So for Europe, in one phrase, the era of geopolitical innocence is over. And I'm not only referring to Russia's invasion in Ukraine, I'm referring to a large change in the context of the way we perceive things. Second, there is a drastic change, I would say, in the way in which we perceive how we should instrumentalize our policies in Europe. Let me say one anecdote that touches upon Greenland, actually. On the first Eurogroup meeting that I chaired in January, we had the Greenland debate outside the room, but within the room originally we had to elect a vice president of the European Central Bank. So we had 6 candidates, and what more experienced people than myself originally told me is that with 6 candidates, this would take months to reach one candidate, given the way Europe typically works. So what me and my colleagues decided was that, look, if we can't elect a vice president of the ECB, when we have to defend European sovereignty, Greenland sovereignty, and the territorial debate, the kindest thing I can say is that this will look really bad. So we elected the vice president of the ECB in 2.5 hours, even though the expectation was that it would happen in 4, 5, 6 months. Now, why am I saying this? This is not interesting for the broader public, how you elect someone within the context of European institutions. But it is interesting to showcase political will to change many things domestically. So the good thing about Europe is that we know what we haven't done for a very long time. We have a thing that I would describe as the dividend of the obvious. We know that we haven't completed our capital markets. We know that we haven't completed our banking union, our energy union, and we know that we need a doctrine about technology. Technology will disrupt everything, and I'm not only referring to artificial intelligence, which is the obvious debate. There will be another debate after that and another debate after that, and you need a doctrine and a strategy about how to capacity build your sovereignty. And if I were to codify this in one phrase, I would say that the wrong way to go is to view sovereignty as a synonym of autonomy. Autonomy is one dimension of sovereignty, but you can exercise sovereignty in many ways, and Europe has taught this, actually. You can exercise sovereignty through control. We have European champions, we have technology champions in Europe, we have banking champions in Europe. We just need a mentality shift, and the mentality shift is that we shouldn't think in terms of national champions, French, Greek, German, but in terms of European champions. Should we be doing that more in every space? Certainly in technology, but also in banks, certainly in stock exchanges, in every single field. If we don't manage to grow European companies at European and thus global champion status, they won't be able to globally compete in a world that is technologically disrupted in the most drastic possible terms, simply put. So part of the discussion is policy. Part of the discussion is changing context. But the final discussion, and I would say and argue the most important one, is that we need this mentality shift. And because of what is happening throughout the world right now, because of the fact that, as I said at the beginning, this era of geopolitical innocence is over, this generation of policymakers understands this, grasps this. So we know that all the projects that many previous generations have discussed for a very long time, be that the capital markets union, the banking union, the energy union, technology, telecoms, everything, we know that we need to deliver all of them simultaneously. And that's the only way to actually answer your question properly. So I'm optimistic, not only because, as the Churchill quote says, I'm optimistic because there is no point in being anything else. I'm optimistic because truly I believe that this generation can deliver.
So strengthening Europe has to learn to live differently in its relationship with the United States. Gianna Ben-Yehuda, you are the Vice President of the Atlantic Council. Hello. the change in relationship with Washington, is that an opportunity for Europeans to become more autonomous, to become stronger, and even to become leaders once more?
Thank you. They said this panel was going to be a hot ticket, but I didn't know it'd be this hot. So I'm delighted to be here with all of you. And look, it's July 3rd. Tomorrow is the 250th celebration of the U.S. independence. And so I first want to thank France and remind all of us that France was there helping the U.S. during the revolution. And so we have a lot of history. We have a lot of history. And so when we talk about our partners and allies, this is a long marriage. I've only been married for 21 years, and I can tell you, it's not always easy. And so multiply that by 4, and it gets pretty tricky because partners change over time. We're not the same as we were when we got married, right? And so what does a long marriage require? A lot of flexibility, a recognition that there is change that is a part of this, and sometimes that change happens at different speeds. And that, I think, is a little bit of what's happening right now. Since we're quoting folks from up to 75 or 100 years ago, I'll add a quote from Eisenhower, who in the 1950s said, "If we still have American troops in Europe in 10 years, we will have grievously erred." Here we are. So this notion that Europe needs to do more for its collective defense is not new to the Trump administration. It dates back to Eisenhower, and then most recently under Obama, and then again under Biden. Now, I think we could have a robust discussion about how the nature of that conversation has changed. Certainly the tone and tenor has changed. But I think we broadly want the same things. It's that we want them at different speeds. And so the Trump administration wants to see results quickly, and there's a gap between the results that Washington wants to see and Europe's ability to catch up to those results. But there's really good news, which is that in the last 2 years, there's an additional $250 billion of European defense spending. That's extraordinary. And it's also happening allied to a NATO family of plans. There's a plan, there's capability. And so speed has to be, to the minister's good point about the nature of technology and all that it will bring. We can't sit in rooms and wait for months and months to make decisions anymore. There's a land war in Europe. We haven't seen that since World War II in this way. And the war changes all the time. And so we have a lot to learn from the bravery and ingenuity and innovation of the Ukrainians, who could teach us a lot about how to build a defense industrial base. And next week I'll head to NATO, as will many, and we'll look at this summit as we looked so differently at the Hague summit. Hague was about commitment. This is about results. And Europe is producing results. Some results will take a lot of time. Others are more easily gained. But there's a lot in common. We have to remember the nature of our adversaries. It's not just Russia. It's also North Korea. It's also Iran. It's also China. And they're not operating alone. They're working together in ways that are more complex and interwoven than powers did in World War II. Who is resupplying drones to kill Ukrainians? Chinese. Who is buying Russian oil? A lot of other people, right? And so we need to remember the complexity of this moment, and also that there's so much technology afoot. And so 10 years from now, we're not going to be talking about the numbers of missiles. We're going to be talking about quantum, about encryption, about the security of our systems, because we're in this moment where the backbone of our economies is being transformed in real time. So we can think about a different marriage, or we can work with a marriage we have and recognize that it's hard, and sometimes partners disagree, but ultimately there's a lot of shared purpose.
Thank you. Jean-Noël Barrot. Bon, d'abord, c'est peut-être...
Jean-Noël Barrot. First of all, maybe it's an argument in a marriage. The divorce hasn't happened yet. What Jenna is saying, perhaps, is it's also an opportunity to give Europe an electroshock, which should take charge of its own affairs more. What do you think? Yes. I think you have to put things in perspective. The relationship, the marriage, if you like, between the United States and France takes us back to the history of another European hero, the figure of Lafayette, who at the age of 19 disobeyed everybody, got on board a ship in Bordeaux and went to join these brave fighters fighting for American independence in order to help them. And 150 years later, we have brave young people, 19 years old, young Americans who came to Europe and on the Normandy beaches to liberate France and to liberate Europe and to defend the values we have in common and that we share. Of course, occasionally we have disagreements, but none of these disagreements erases the depth of this relationship, which is anchored in a common perspective and a common vision. Then, concerning the question of how Europe takes charge of its own security, let me tell you something which is a bit provocative, perhaps. The United States and France are perfectly aligned. In other words, Europe has to gradually become, and it's true in the world of defense and other fields, it has to become more independent. Europe owes to the United States the fact that on the ruins of the Second World War, they were able to build the most sophisticated and advanced democratic structure in the world. We wouldn't have been able to do that without the benevolence and the support of the Americans. But it was true in Eisenhower's mind, as it was true in the founding fathers of Europe. The objective was for Europe to grow and for it to become emancipated and for it to become independent. So, at a time when the United States have decided to look again at the level of commitment to the European continent within NATO, let's not cry about spilt milk. Let's look at it as an opportunity for Europe to develop its own vision, its own capacities within this alliance, the NATO alliance, which has enabled us to live in peace on this continent for many decades. There are other subjects of disagreement with the United States, but on that specific question of Europe taking charge of its own security, I think we have a convergent vision. Since when has Europe not imposed its vision on the world? Or rather, when has it started imposing its vision on the rest of the world? Well, you know, the world of yesterday, to refer to the work of Stefan Zweig, has been very much fashioned by Europe. The world we are living in with the international rule-based order, which came about after the Second World War, with the principles that we have all highlighted, the fact that you do not resort to force unless there's no other possibility, the right of peoples to assert their own authority. This didn't happen all by itself when the United Nations Charter was signed in San Francisco. All of this is a heritage of centuries of war and peace in Europe. All of this is a heritage of which we are the owners of. What we must beware of the increasing rivalry between two superpowers. One superpower that exerted itself in the last century, and the other emerging superpower, which is China. I mean, in our history, we've seen occasions when superpowers have been in rivalry to try to be the dominant superpower, and these phases of economic transition create a lot of instability and volatility and a lot of risks and conflicts. So for Europe, it's an invitation, an order to create its own strategic sovereignty, and this is the idea that the President has been conveying and communicating over the last few years. Jens Fredrik Nielsen, do you feel safe in Europe?
Just around these days with the world order. No, I think, as I said, I totally agree with Minister Barrot when he said that the dependencies Europe has to other countries need to be lower. And that's where I actually think Greenland can contribute. I really think a partnership between Greenland, a closer partnership between Greenland and the European countries, and I will say it again, countries who share our values for democracy, human rights, and so on, rule-based order, we can contribute to the lack of minerals there is in Europe, the dependency on China and others in terms of that area. We can contribute in terms of energy, hydropower, and so on. We have so many things we can contribute to. But I perfectly agree when he said that they are too dependent. It has been too slow for too many years. In a Greenlandic perspective, we are of course trying to sort our so-called marriage out now with the Americans. We have had a defense agreement with them since after the Second World War, and the world has been going. It has been a rule-based order with respect for partners and so on since then. That's a bit challenged now, and we are trying to sort things out in a dialogue. We don't see the end yet, but hope is not a strategy. So when the world is changing like it is now, we need to move a lot closer together in the bus in Europe, maybe with Canada, with others who share the values of democracy. And when we do that, we can be less dependent on countries that has different values. And I think that's really a key point. And we can contribute in Greenland. We promise a strong partnership. We can secure something that's difficult to secure other places than in China, for example.
Ross McInnes, vous vouliez réagir, je vous ai un peu...
Ross McInnes, you wanted to react. I interrupted you, sorry. Yes, I wanted to react to our American guest. So we're talking about marriages.
The impression that daddy has left home. Autrement dit, non seulement papa menace de partir.
Not only is daddy maybe leaving home, I'm not even going to pay alimony. So for Europe to become better organized in its defense, yes. At a certain time, we're going to ask our citizens to make sacrifices in terms of the welfare state. We're going to change from the welfare state to the warfare state. We can't content ourselves with just spending this money on American equipment. Each of us needs to have our own resilience between Europeans on a number of programs by using our technological resources that exist in France, in Germany and Greece, in Poland and elsewhere, to build up different programs, and so we can create objects where we'll be able to spend our taxpayers' money, the citizens' money on those objects, and get free from daddy.
Yeah, I mean, just to respond to that, you know, in my house, the women work too. And so maybe daddy's away, but it turns out the wife has advanced degrees and makes money of her own. And so look, I think there's an opportunity. And there's a real opportunity for Europe to carve a story of its own agency, to look for this moment, to move with clarity and precision, and to recognize that there's a strategic moment not just to spend money on defense. We talk about spending money. We need capability. Capability to restore deterrence. And there are amazing companies, some represented here, that are providing the tools to be able to do that. But a big part of that also has to be interoperability. Why buy a bunch of stuff that doesn't talk to each other? It just doesn't make sense. There has to be a level of trust, of fluency, of speed, and it is going to require growth across Europe and an innovation economy right now that's just not strong enough.
Allez-y.
A response to this, or a reaction to this, the good thing is that we have an obvious thing that we hadn't done for ages. Defense is the obvious thing. Are there low-hanging fruits in defense? Yes, there are. Each country is procuring the same thing 27 times right now. But we all need certain things for sure. We need border protection, we need satellites, we need drones. So the value of jointly procuring is huge. Have we done it before? Yes, we have. It's called the European Space Agency. We have done it for space. So that's easy. What is less easy is another thing. It's to make choices. What do I mean by that? We don't have an infinite budget. So the idea should be, if you want to be sovereign, that's why I said before, it's not the same as autonomy, because we cannot create European versions of everything. Currently, the 3 American hyperscalers vis-à-vis cloud have 2/3 of the market in Europe. No European company right now has more than 2% in market share in cloud. So that's not the obvious area to go and build a European champion. But in 5G, we had the capacity in terms of infrastructure, and we still do. We have 2 global champions, one in Finland, one in Sweden, who are the core competitors of the Chinese companies. It's not an American company. So what did we do as Europeans? Did we create an ecosystem around these companies, especially as the first Trump administration was taking a specific stance on that issue? No, we still have a fragmented telecom market. We still have 27 auctions for 5G, and we will have the same for 6G, and we don't have a clear strategy. So, A, you get your house in order, you fix the plumbing of the European economy and of the European system to unlock that obvious growth that's sitting there in front of you, and B, you make choices which are strategic so as you will be non-asymmetrically interdependent. You will not be fully autonomous, but the idea is to be less and less dependent, to hedge. And that's fully capable and fully possible to do.
C'est bien parce que
This is good because the debate has become very interesting between Europe and America, and the men and the women on the platform. This is very interesting to see. Rodolphe Sade, you're rarely available to talk to us about the Hormuz Strait. You've talked to us, you gave some figures, you explained that you still have 4 ships still blocked in Hormuz Strait. I felt you were a little bit pessimistic. I get the impression you're trying to find other solutions instead of Hormuz, and you seem to take very seriously the fact that maritime law might change. There's a real threat that might happen. Do you think you'll still be able to send your ships into the Hormuz Strait? I'd like to come back for a moment to what was said just now. I got the impression that we were criticizing America and taking Europe to court. If we're looking about marriages, there are days with and days without. I think the positive thing with what is happening at the moment is that America is saying to Europe, now you need to get moving. A year ago, at the same time we were here, it wasn't quite so hot, but we said exactly the same thing. And what happened? Not much. So it's very well saying it's all America's fault. We don't like what's happening in the US. I don't exactly agree with that point of view, although it's true that we are being destabilized by the changes taking place in the US. But isn't it the time maybe for Europe to get moving and put an action plan in place and stop criticizing what happens elsewhere? Sorry, I'll repeat my question. You don't blame America for Hormuz. I blame everybody. If you want to talk about what's happening in Hormuz, I'm in favor of a market that is open and oceans that are open to shipping and to trade. I'm not pessimistic, on the contrary. I tend to be more optimistic personally, but when a crisis lasts for so long, and for it to be so expensive for everybody, because a lot of money, not just for the shippers, but also for everybody here. At one time or another, we'd like it to stop and to move on to something else, and for the wars of ego should be put to one side. At this moment, is there any question? Are you going to send ships back into the Strait of Hormuz? No, it's not going to happen for a while. Tomorrow morning, maybe I might tell you everything is fine and we can do it, or maybe in 6 months' time we're still blocked. Who tells you not to go into the Hormuz Strait, the Americans or the Iranians? Today it's the Iranians telling us not to send our ships through the Hormuz Strait. And the Americans say you can do it if you like, but it's at your risk. No need to translate that. You won't have much time to ask any questions. Maybe in the audience somebody would like to ask a question to our panelists? No? No questions? Come on, don't be shy. Yes, we have one question at the back. We take a microphone to the person so we can hear them. That should be possible, I think. Right over there.
avec une chemise hawaïenne.
Wearing a Hawaiian shirt. Hello, we have no prejudices. The question, first of all, is for Minister Barrow, who said some very good things. What do you think is the future going to look like when the Prime Minister Mark Carney, spoke in Davos, talked about an alliance of middle powers? Of course, European Union, Canada, Brazil, maybe not because it's part of BRICS, and India. Is this a possibility for the future, or is it just a temporary political slogan? It was a question for you, yes. I think that it's the right idea to open up this third path between the two superpowers who I was saying are confronting each other. First of all, we need to work on ourselves, and we've heard about this in different ways ever since throughout this discussion. Independent strategic autonomy of Europe is absolutely vital for it to be able to resist the blackmail and the coercion and the intimidation. We have to do work to do on ourselves internally, and then we have to have alliances with others. Canada has been mentioned by the Prime Minister of Greenland, also India and Brazil, which I have just come back from. And in other words, a number of powers who see themselves as non-aligned and also want to escape from the spheres of influence of these superpowers. These alliances do not exempt us from the need to do this important work for ourselves internally in Europe. We've already seen this type of coalition for Ukraine, for example, where for the first time in their history, most of the European countries have grouped together in a coalition of the willing to bring together their military capacity as part of an international mission, so that once peace is sealed, it can be guaranteed. And we can also see it in the Strait of Hormuz, where France with the United Kingdom have brought together several dozens of countries who are ready to provide demining services and escort services so that maritime traffic and shipping can start up again. So we can see there are different types of this kind of new coalition, which don't choose a side, but which strive to preserve their independence while building it in a respectful relationship which respects the sovereignty of their partners. Jenna, we haven't talked about being unfaithful, but how do you see this group of countries that are not on China's side or really on the American side?
Powers is like a trendy topic, and I think Carney gave space to a sentiment that a lot of nations feel. They don't see themselves in the image of Donald Trump. They don't see themselves as part of the People's Republic of China. They're looking for alternatives, but there are realities in markets. And I think to the minister's good point about hyperscalers in particular, you've got to be really realistic about the just massive amounts of capital that are required to compete in certain areas. So should there be opportunities for more inclusive voices? You know, ought we think about opportunities to draw in nations which don't see themselves? Sure, but there's a reality, which is that nations need to provide for themselves. There are huge youth unemployment bulges coming out of Africa. We think we're talking about immigration now. Buckle up. We're just not ready, to say nothing of what AI could do to the future of the workforce. So all of these things that are afoot, I think sometimes they're romantic notions, because I don't know about you, I feel a tremendous sense of urgency about all that's required to prepare for this moment. We are not just in a security emergency. We are in a moment where the building blocks of the economy of the future are totally up for grabs. And we might end up with a structure that feels nothing like what we experience now. That's what we're fighting for. So it can be US, it can be China, it can like, you don't have to, it's not gonna be pick a team, it's not like universally applied, but nations have to think about what the choices are, and they're narrower than we think.
Vous voulez répondre? Ah oui, on n'a pas de micro.
And to that point, I think that technology is going to be an equally big driver together with geopolitics. Because if I were to codify it in a phrase, we over-rationalize the past, we over-dramatize the present, and we underestimate the future. And the density of events that is happening right now is such that technological acceleration, which was happening in the decades, imagine a technological change of my generation. From the video club to Netflix, how long did it take? It took a long time. 10, 15 years, AI is going to see changes happening in the months or even in the weeks. And typically, we understand the world linearly. This is happening exponentially, and political systems historically react sublinearly. So right now, we have this challenge in front of us, together with all the outstanding challenges. So we better buckle up, but first we need to fully understand and grasp what is happening in front of us. And we have the capacities as Europeans to respond. We have the hardware. What was missing for a very long time was the software, the policies and the political will. Both are there.
Merci beaucoup et merci à vous tous. On a parfaitement respecté.
Thank you very much, everybody. We've kept to our time perfectly. Thank you very much. Françoise Benoît, did you want to add something? No microphone. Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody, for participating in this conference.